What if I told you that sometimes the cruelest betrayal becomes the greatest gift, but only if you survive long enough to understand the difference? What if losing everything you've worked for in a single morning could lead you to resources beyond anything you ever imagined possible? This is the moment when hope dies. When 8 months of survival, 6 weeks of intensive boat construction, and dreams of freedom sail away on the horizon in the hands of thieves who watched you build their escape route. When you discover that trust can be more dangerous than isolation, and that fellow castaways can prove deadlier than any storm. But this is also the moment when real transformation begins, because sometimes you have to lose everything you think you need before you can find everything you actually need. Sometimes betrayal strips away illusions about human nature while revealing resources that make mere survival look like child's play. What happens when starting over with nothing leads to inheriting everything? What happens when the people who destroyed your dreams left behind resources that make those dreams look small and limited? And what happens when you discover that the radio equipment you've dreamed of having has been waiting for you all along if you can figure out how to make it work? Today you begin the most important chapter of your island life. Not the desperate struggle for survival, but the sophisticated challenge of learning to live comfortably while maintaining hope for rescue that finally has realistic foundation. Dawn breaks with the kind of crystal clarity that should mark the beginning of your escape from 8 months of island imprisonment. But the eastern cove reveals a devastation so complete that your mind struggles to process what your eyes are seeing. The boat is gone. Not damaged by weather, not broken loose by tide, but deliberately taken by human hands that left no trace except the absence of everything you've worked to achieve. Your fully loaded vessel moves steadily across the distant horizon, too far to reach but close enough to see 2 figures managing the sail and rigging with competence that suggests they've been planning this theft for as long as you've been building their escape route. 8 months of survival learning, boat construction, and careful preparation have become someone else's salvation while leaving you with nothing but the clothes on your back. The scope of the betrayal becomes clear as you inventory what's been stolen along with the boat itself. Your preserved food supplies, fresh water stores, navigation equipment, essential tools, journal documenting 8 months of island experience, and every personal item that connected you to your former life. They've taken not just your escape route, but your entire accumulated wealth of survival resources. The 2 figures on your stolen boat show no sign of acknowledgement or remorse as they sail steadily toward the shipping lanes you identified through careful study of M's navigation notes. Your research, your planning, your construction has enabled their escape while stranding you more completely than the original shipwreck that brought you here 8 months ago. Standing on the empty beach where your boat should be waiting for departure, you realize that your unknown fellow islanders have been planning this theft throughout the months of surveillance you detected, but never fully understood. They watched you struggle with basic survival, observed your construction techniques, and waited for completion before revealing their true intentions through the cruelest possible betrayal. The psychological impact exceeds any hardship you've endured during 8 months of island residence. Hurricane damage, failed rescue attempts, and equipment failures all represented setbacks that effort and skill could overcome. But watching your life's work sail away in the hands of people who stole everything you've achieved creates a form of defeat that no amount of survival knowledge can address. The morning sun rises over an island that has become not just your home, but your prison, surrounded by endless ocean that you now have no means of crossing. Your escape route has become someone else's freedom, while you face the prospect of starting over with nothing but the hard-won knowledge that other human beings can prove more dangerous than any natural threat this island has presented. Hours pass in a strange suspension between rage and numbness as you stand on the empty beach, watching the stolen boat become a tiny speck before disappearing entirely into the morning haze. The silence feels different now. Not the peaceful quiet of early island mornings, but the hollow silence of absolute solitude. Even the possibility of other human presence has been stripped away, leaving you more alone than you've ever been. Your body moves without conscious direction, feet carrying you along the waterline as your mind struggles to process the completeness of the loss. Every step reveals another absence. No emergency supplies cached nearby, no backup tools hidden in the rocks, no secondary plans that might salvage something from this disaster. Your methodical preparation included contingencies for weather, equipment failure, and navigation errors, but never for theft by fellow castaways. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the immediate reality of survival needs that must be addressed despite emotional devastation. You have no water, no food, no shelter, no tools, except what you can improvise from natural materials. The survival knowledge accumulated over 8 months remains intact, but all the tools and resources that made that knowledge effective are now sailing toward rescue in other hands. You pause beside a familiar tidal pool where you once spent hours learning to catch small fish with improvised traps. The techniques remain clear in your memory, but the patience required to execute them from a state of emotional collapse feels almost impossible. Still, your body needs water within hours, not days, and the ocean provides no solution to that fundamental requirement. The betrayal cuts deeper than simple theft because it represents a violation of the unspoken community that you imagined might exist between fellow castaways. During months of detecting their presence, you fantasized about eventual contact, shared resources, mutual aid in survival challenges. Instead, they studied your efforts with cold calculation, waiting for you to solve their escape problem before revealing themselves through theft. Moving inland toward the jungle edge, you begin the grim process of cataloging what natural resources remain available for starting over. Fresh water sources, edible plants, materials for tools and shelter. Everything you learned to identify and use during your early weeks here becomes relevant again. The irony isn't lost on you that expertise gained through desperation must now be applied to an even more desperate situation. Your stomach gnaws with hunger, but more pressing is the thirst that comes with emotional shock and morning sun. Finding water becomes the first priority, followed by basic shelter, then food procurement. The same sequence you followed 8 months ago, but now informed by hard-won experience rather than panicked improvisation. The path toward your original well site leads through undergrowth that has grown thicker during months of neglect, branches catching at your clothes like grasping fingers. Each step takes you further from the scene of betrayal and closer to resources that might support basic survival while you process the enormity of starting over. The familiar route provides some comfort, muscle memory guiding you toward water, even as your mind reels with loss. Your first camp established near this freshwater source 8 months ago now exists only as faint depressions in the earth and scattered stones from a fire ring long since dispersed. The well itself remains functional, Clear water seeping up through sand and rocks exactly as you left it weeks ago. You drop to your knees beside it and drink deeply, the cool liquid providing the first tangible relief since discovering the theft. Water secured, you turn attention to the second most pressing need, shelter that can protect you through the approaching night. The ragged clothes on your back provide minimal insulation, and you remember too clearly how cold the nights became during your early weeks before you learned proper shelter construction. Palm fronds and bamboo grow abundantly nearby, the same materials you used for your first crude lean-to. The work goes faster now, hands remembering techniques that once took hours to puzzle out through trial and error. Cutting palm fronds with sharp stones, selecting bamboo poles of proper thickness, lashing joints with twisted grass fibers, skills that felt miraculous when first learned, now flow naturally despite your emotional state. Physical activity provides temporary escape from the mental anguish of betrayal. Your new shelter takes shape more efficiently than the desperate construction 8 months ago, but lacks the sophisticated improvements you developed over time at various camps. No raised sleeping platform, no water collection system, no weatherproofing beyond basic palm thatch. You're building for immediate survival, not long-term comfort, though the distinction feels academic when long-term has become an enforced reality rather than a choice. As afternoon shadows begin lengthening, you pause in construction to consider food procurement. Your stomach cramps with hunger intensified by emotional stress, but rushing into food gathering without proper technique risks illness that could prove fatal when medical resources consist entirely of plant knowledge and basic first aid. Better to endure hunger tonight than risk dysentery or food poisoning that could disable you for days. The techniques for finding and preparing safe food sources remain clear in your memory. Identifying edible roots, locating fruit trees, constructing fish traps, preparing plant materials to neutralize toxins. Knowledge that once felt like miraculous discoveries now becomes your foundation for rebuilding everything that was stolen, along with that boat disappearing toward the horizon hours ago. Evening brings the familiar ritual of fire-making, though now accomplished with friction methods rather than the lighter that sailed away with everything else you owned. The bow drill technique requires patience and proper tinder preparation, skills that once seemed impossible but now flow naturally, despite your emotional exhaustion. Smoke rises from dry grass and wood shavings, followed by the small flame that transforms your crude shelter into something approaching home. Dinner consists of familiar island fare, coconut meat, edible roots you recognize from months of careful experimentation, and small fish caught with improvised traps in the tidal pools. The food tastes different when eaten from necessity rather than choice, each bite reminding you of the abundance you'd accumulated and lost. Still, your body accepts the nourishment gratefully, strength returning as blood sugar stabilizes. The fire crackles softly as darkness settles over the island, providing both warmth and psychological comfort that helps push back the despair, threatening to overwhelm rational thought. Orange light dances across palm fronds of your shelter, creating the illusion of security even though you're more vulnerable now than during your first terrified night 8 months ago. Experience has taught you what to fear and what to ignore. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by dreams of sailing boats and the strange relief that comes with solitude after betrayal. Each time you wake, the reality settles over you, truly alone now. But perhaps that brings its own form of peace. The stars wheel overhead, constant companions that ask nothing and take nothing, unlike the humans who sailed away with your work. Dawn arrives with bird calls and the soft crash of waves, sounds that once again begin to feel like home rather than prison. You tend the fire carefully, adding small pieces of wood to coax flames back to life, then eat a breakfast of remaining coconut and root vegetables. Physical needs met. Your mind begins turning toward practical questions about what your former fellow castaways might have left behind. During months of detecting their presence, you develop theories about where they might be living, based on resource locations, shelter requirements, and the patterns of surveillance you occasionally noticed. The managed fruit grove you discovered suggested permanent settlement somewhere with access to fresh water and defendable high ground. Those locations remain unchanged and may contain resources abandoned in their haste to escape. Two people maintaining secret residence would require tools, shelter materials, food stores, and equipment that might prove useful for your own rebuilt survival efforts. More than that, understanding how they lived so successfully in hiding might provide techniques and improvements you could adapt for your own long-term island residence. The search begins with systematic exploration of areas you always suspected might harbor human activity, starting with the inland ridge system that provides both freshwater access and natural concealment from beach observation. Your movements feel different now, less cautious about being detected, since you know the watchers have sailed away, but more alert to signs of abandoned habitation that might have been overlooked during their occupancy. The first discovery comes sooner than expected, a barely visible trail leading up from the managed fruit grove toward higher ground. The path shows years of careful development, steps cut into steep sections, handholds carved into rock faces, drainage channels to prevent erosion during heavy rains. This isn't a casual route, but an engineered passage built for daily use over an extended period. 20 minutes of steady climbing brings you to a natural shelf of rock, partially concealed by overhanging vegetation, and there you find evidence of long-term human habitation that stops you in your tracks. Not crude survival shelters like your various camps, but a sophisticated living complex that speaks to years of patient development and refinement. They weren't recent castaways at all. They were long-term residents who had mastered island life completely. Two substantial huts constructed from bamboo and palm thatch occupy the most protected areas of the shelf, their design showing refinements that come only from extended trial and error. Raised sleeping platforms with woven mat surfaces, integrated water collection systems with bamboo guttering, ventilation features including adjustable wall panels, and weatherproofing details that represent solutions to problems you're still learning to solve. The area between huts reveals further evidence of established, comfortable residence, fire pits with sophisticated draft controls and cooking surfaces, food preparation areas with stone tools shaped for specific tasks, drying racks for fish and plant materials, and storage systems that protect supplies from weather and animals. This represents not survival, but genuine island, living with all basic needs met and comfort achieved. While you spent months learning basic survival through trial and error, they had developed systems and knowledge that made island life not just possible, but genuinely comfortable. Their surveillance of your efforts now seems less like deception and more like the natural caution of people protecting a life they'd built successfully over many years. Moving carefully through their living space, you begin cataloguing what they left behind in their departure, discovering that people who had spent years perfecting island residence might have abandoned resources that could transform your own survival situation from desperate rebuilding into something approaching comfortable establishment. The first hut yields discoveries that reshape your understanding of how successfully humans can adapt to island living given sufficient time and ingenuity. Personal belongings left behind include clothing expertly repaired and modified for tropical conditions, tools crafted from island materials with obvious skill and long use, and most remarkably, a handmade calendar system carved into bamboo panels that tracks not just days but seasonal patterns, tidal cycles, weather trends, and resource availability going back over 4 years. Food stores reveal abundance and variety that makes your own survival efforts look elementary by comparison. Dried fish prepared with techniques you don't recognize, processed root vegetables treated to extend storage life, fermented plant materials that suggest sophisticated preservation knowledge, and fruit preparations stored in waterproof containers that could feed a person for months. They lived here with genuine prosperity, not mere survival. The second hut contains what appears to be a workshop and study area that transforms your concept of what island living could become. Carved wooden items showing real artistry, woven materials using plant fibers you haven't learned to process, bone and shell tools crafted for specialized purposes, books wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, covering topics from navigation to tropical medicine, and, most intriguingly, detailed notebooks documenting island resource cycles, weather patterns, and survival techniques written in careful handwriting. But it's the discovery, in a carefully concealed alcove, that changes everything. A two-way marine radio, obviously salvaged from their original vessel, connected to a battery system that should have died years ago, but shows clear signs of recent use. The battery bank consists of 6 large marine batteries wired together, and beside them sits the most ingenious piece of island engineering you've ever seen. A human-powered charging system built from bicycle parts and metal salvage. The charging station consists of pedals connected through a chain drive to an alternator salvaged from a boat engine. The entire system mounted on a sturdy bamboo frame that allows someone to generate electrical power through steady pedaling. Beside it, a hand-crank backup system provides an alternative charging method, and both connect to a voltage regulator that protects the batteries from overcharging. The engineering represents years of development and testing. Your hands shake with excitement rather than fear as you examine the radio and power system. The radio appears functional, its LED indicators showing battery charge and signal strength. After 8 months of assuming rescue required building boats or hoping for passing ships, you're looking at direct communication equipment that could contact the outside world immediately. The battery charge indicator shows nearly full power. Suddenly, the betrayal that seemed so devastating this morning has delivered you into a situation far better than anything you'd achieved through your own efforts. Not only do you have shelter, tools, and food supplies that surpass months of your own work, but you have the means to call for rescue whenever you choose to do so. The euphoria of discovering functional rescue communication makes it difficult to focus on systematic exploration, but years of island living have taught you the value of understanding all available resources before making major decisions. The radio represents immediate escape, but the sophisticated settlement around you suggests these people had developed island living into something approaching genuine comfort rather than mere survival. Returning to the first hut for more thorough investigation, you discover fishing equipment that immediately captures your attention, not the crude hooks and lines you struggled with for months, but elegant rods crafted from bamboo with guides made from bone rings, reels constructed from carved wood and metal salvage, and tackle boxes containing lures, weights, and hooks in varieties you didn't know could be improvised from island materials. The craftsmanship speaks to both skill and extensive testing. These aren't desperate survival tools, but refined instruments developed through years of use and improvement. The bamboo rods show careful selection of materials, proper curing, and joinery techniques that create functional flexibility. The wooden reels operate smoothly, their gears carved with precision that allows easy casting and retrieval. Most intriguingly, the tackle selection includes lures designed for specific local conditions, carved bonefish that mimic species you've seen in shallow water, weighted sinkers shaped for different current conditions, and hook combinations that suggest detailed knowledge of what fish inhabit which areas around the island. This represents not just fishing success, but systematic study of local marine life. Your own fishing efforts have been limited to basic traps and crude hand lines that barely provided subsistence protein. These sophisticated rods and the variety of specialized tackle suggest fishing locations and techniques that could provide not just adequate nutrition, but genuine abundance. Examining the rods more carefully, you notice wear patterns that indicate regular use in specific environments, saltwater staining that suggests ocean fishing, but also algae residue that points to fresh or brackish water use. The variety suggests multiple fishing locations, each requiring different approaches and equipment configurations. The logical next step involves following whatever paths or signs might lead to their fishing areas, both to understand how they achieved such obvious success and to determine whether the same locations remain productive now that you're the island's only human resident seeking to benefit from their years of careful development. Exploration beyond the huts reveals a network of paths you hadn't noticed during your initial survey, some leading toward familiar areas, but others heading in directions you've never thoroughly investigated. The fishing equipment suggests water access beyond the obvious coastal areas, and you decide to follow the most well-worn trail leading away from the main settlement toward what appears to be the island's interior rather than toward any beach. The path winds through dense vegetation for perhaps 10 minutes before beginning a gentle descent toward a sound you've never heard from this location, the quiet lapping of water against rocks, but different from ocean waves. The trail shows signs of regular use, including cut branches, cleared obstacles, and occasional stepping stones placed to ease passage during wet weather. As the vegetation thins, you emerge onto a natural overlook that reveals one of the most beautiful sights you've encountered during 8 months of island residence, a sheltered inlet or small bay completely hidden from ocean view, connected to the sea through a narrow channel barely visible from your vantage point. The protected water appears almost lake-like in its calm clarity. The inlet extends perhaps 200 yards in length and half that in width, surrounded by steep banks that create natural windbreaks and privacy from any external observation. More importantly, the clear water reveals abundant fish life, schools of small silver fish moving in coordinated patterns, larger predatory fish patrolling the deeper areas, and bottom dwellers visible against the sandy floor in shallow sections. But it's the evidence of systematic fishing operations that transforms your understanding of how these people achieved such comfortable island living. Along the near shore, partially concealed by overhanging vegetation, you discover an elaborate fishing infrastructure that represents years of careful development and refinement. Wooden platforms extend over the water at strategic locations, each designed for specific fishing techniques. Shallow platforms for net fishing, deeper structures for line fishing, and specialized stations with built-in rod holders positioned to take advantage of current patterns and fish behavior. The entire system shows engineering sophistication that goes far beyond basic survival fishing. Most remarkably, the platforms connect through a system of elevated walkways that allows access to different fishing areas without disturbing the water or alerting fish to human presence. This represents not just successful fishing, but fish management, treating the inlet as a renewable resource to be harvested sustainably rather than simply exploited until depleted. Climbing down a carefully constructed trail to water level, you discover the full extent of the fishing operation these people had developed over their years of island residence. The platforms you observe from above prove to be just the visible portion of a comprehensive system that includes fish traps, breeding areas, and what appears to be active management of the inlet's ecosystem for maximum productivity. Submerged fish traps constructed from bamboo and positioned at strategic points allow passive capture of fish moving through the inlet while still permitting sufficient traffic to maintain healthy populations. The trap designs show sophisticated understanding of fish behavior, current patterns, and seasonal variations that could only come from years of careful observation and experimentation. Near the protected head of the inlet, you find evidence of even more advanced techniques, stone fish pens that appear designed to hold live fish temporarily, perhaps for size selection or breeding management. The construction required moving substantial rocks and careful attention to water flow, representing major engineering projects undertaken to maximize long-term fishing success rather than short-term survival. The fishing platforms themselves contain built-in storage for equipment, cleaning stations with proper drainage, and even simple chairs carved from driftwood that allow comfortable fishing during extended sessions. Everything speaks to people who had transformed fishing from desperate food gathering into a pleasant, productive activity that provided abundant protein with minimal effort. Testing one of the bamboo rods from a platform positioned over a promising deep area, you're amazed by the immediate response, fish strike within minutes, and the quality of the equipment makes fighting and landing them straightforward rather than the desperate struggle you've experienced with improvised tackle. The inlet clearly contains fish populations far beyond anything you've found in coastal areas. Within an hour of casual fishing, you've caught more protein than you typically secured in a full day of intensive coastal fishing efforts. The abundance suggests these people never experienced the food uncertainty that has characterized much of your island residence. They had developed not just survival techniques, but genuine prosperity through systematic resource development. As afternoon light begins to slant across the peaceful inlet, you sit on one of their platforms, surrounded by fresh fish, and contemplate a completely transformed situation. Not only do you have access to immediate rescue through radio communication, but you've inherited a fishing operation that could provide comfortable living for years if needed. The betrayal that seemed so devastating 12 hours ago has inadvertently delivered you into the most advanced survival situation you could imagine. The abundance of resources and comfort of the settlement creates a strange psychological effect. For the first time in 8 months, survival concerns fade into the background, allowing space for emotions you've had to suppress during the constant struggle to meet basic needs. Sitting beside the peaceful inlet with fresh fish for dinner, and the promise of rescue communication waiting back at the radio, your mind turns inevitably toward everything you've lost and everyone you've left behind. The faces of family members seem clearer now than they have in months, no longer competing with immediate concerns about water, food, and shelter for mental space. Your sister's laugh, your father's advice, your mother's cooking, friends who probably believe you died in the shipwreck 8 months ago, all the human connections that give life meaning beyond mere survival. The comfortable island living you've inherited feels hollow when measured against relationships that can never be replaced. Even the most sophisticated island paradise couldn't compensate for birthdays missed, conversations never held, shared experiences that become memories defining who we are within our communities. The fishing success and comfortable shelter represent tools for survival, not substitutes for the human connections that make survival worthwhile. Your heart aches with longing for voices, embraces, and the simple presence of people who know your history. The radio waiting in the settlement represents more than rescue equipment. It's a bridge back to the world where you belong, to people who matter more than any combination of island resources could ever provide. No amount of fishing success or comfortable living could justify choosing isolation when communication with the outside world sits within walking distance, ready to restore you to the life and relationships that define your identity. Walking back toward the settlement as evening approaches, you feel genuinely grateful for the comfort and resources you've inherited, but only as means to an end. The sophisticated settlement will make waiting for rescue more comfortable. The abundant food will keep you healthy, and the radio will make rescue certain rather than hoped for. But none of these things change your fundamental desire to leave this island forever. The evening meal tastes better than any you've eaten since arriving here, prepared over a proper fire pit with fresh fish caught using effective equipment, but is flavored by anticipation of the last such meal you'll need to eat alone, seasoned by the knowledge that rescue communication awaits your decision about when and how to use it. Tonight you'll sleep in comfort. You couldn't have imagined this morning, but you'll sleep knowing that tomorrow brings the realistic possibility of beginning your journey home to the people and places that give your life its deeper meaning beyond survival success. The sophisticated shelter provides the most comfortable night's sleep you've experienced since the shipwreck, but your dreams remain focused on home, familiar streets, favorite restaurants, the sound of traffic that once seemed annoying but now represents the human activity you desperately miss. Even perfect island comfort can't satisfy the deep human need for community and connection that defines our social nature. Morning brings renewed energy and optimism, not for island living, but for the rescue process that can now begin whenever you choose to initiate it. The radio equipment represents hope realized rather than hope deferred, and you approach it with the mixture of excitement and nervousness that comes with knowing you're about to reconnect with the world you've been separated from for 8 months. The battery charge indicator shows full power from the human-powered charging system, and the radio displays proper function when you run through the basic operation checks you remember from years ago. The VHF marine frequencies should connect you to Coast Guard monitoring stations, commercial vessels, or emergency services capable of coordinating rescue operations. After months of hoping for ships to notice your signals, you can now speak directly to people equipped to help. But something holds you back from making the call immediately. Not doubt about wanting rescue, but recognition that this contact will begin a process that moves at its own pace beyond your control. Once you call for help, rescue timing depends on weather, available vessels, and coordination factors you can't influence. The comfortable resources you've inherited make the waiting period far more manageable than it would have been from your crude camps. Instead of rushing into immediate radio contact, you decide to spend a few days learning to use the resources effectively while maintaining the equipment properly. The charging system needs regular use to keep batteries at optimal levels. The fishing equipment requires care to prevent deterioration, and the shelter systems need basic maintenance to remain functional throughout your remaining time here. This brief delay serves practical purposes, ensuring you can maintain the radio equipment, securing adequate food supplies, and preparing for whatever timeline rescue operations might require. But more importantly, it gives you time to process the emotional transition from desperate survival to confident rescue planning, allowing your mind to adjust gradually to the reality that your island residence now has a definite, manageable conclusion. The difference feels profound. Yesterday you faced indefinite isolation with basic survival resources. Today you face temporary waiting with comfortable living conditions and certain communication access. The psychological shift from desperation to patience marks a fundamental change in how you relate to island residence and your ultimate return home. The days that follow establish routines that blend practical maintenance with emotional preparation for returning to civilization after 8 months of isolation and survival learning. Each morning begins with checking the radio equipment and running the charging system, ensuring your communication link remains reliable and ready for use whenever conditions favor rescue operations. Your relationship with the island transforms during these days, no longer a prison or even a survival challenge, but a temporary residence where you can live comfortably while coordinating return to your real life. The sophisticated resources make daily living pleasant rather than difficult, providing time and mental space to process the experiences of the past 8 months and prepare for reintegration with the world you've been separated from. The fishing success continues to provide abundant protein with minimal effort, allowing you to maintain physical health while focusing mental energy on planning and emotional adjustment rather than food procurement. The comfortable shelter protects you from weather while you work on radio maintenance and charging routines. The various tools and equipment provide security against the minor emergencies that once seemed potentially fatal. Each evening brings careful attention to radio procedures and emergency frequencies, practicing the communication skills you'll need when you decide to make contact with rescue services. The equipment operates perfectly, but you want to ensure clear, efficient communication that will facilitate rapid response rather than confusion or delay when the critical moment arrives. Most importantly, these comfortable days allow you to process the complex emotions surrounding your eventual rescue and return home. The person who will return home differs significantly from the person who was shipwrecked, and the transition from island living to civilization will require adjustment and patience. Your journal entries during this period focus less on survival techniques and more on emotional preparation for reunion with family, friends, and a world that has continued changing during your absence. The comfortable island living provides a bridge between the desperate survival you've known and the reintegration challenges that await your return to society. Soon, you'll make the radio call that begins your journey home, but these days of comfortable preparation ensure you'll approach that communication and the subsequent rescue process from a position of strength, health, and emotional readiness rather than desperation. The betrayal that seems so devastating has given you not just better resources, but the psychological foundation for successful reintegration with the life and relationships you've never stopped wanting to return to. The first serious attempt at radio communication reveals problems you hadn't anticipated during your optimistic initial assessment of the equipment. While the radio powers on properly and displays correct battery levels, actually finding active frequencies requires extended periods of scanning through channels, each requiring sustained power consumption that drains the batteries faster than expected. The charging system, though ingenious, demands significant physical effort to maintain adequate power levels. 15 minutes of pedaling the bicycle charging system provides roughly enough power for 30 minutes of radio operation. But finding emergency frequencies or active communication channels requires patient scanning that can consume hours of battery power before identifying any signals. The mathematics become discouraging quickly. Effective radio communication demands more charging time than seems practical for a single person maintaining all other aspects of island living. Your first extended communication session lasts 3 hours, slowly scanning through emergency frequencies, commercial shipping channels, and Coast Guard monitoring bands without detecting any active signals or responses to your emergency calls. The effort leaves you exhausted from alternating between radio operation and frantic pedaling to maintain battery charge, while accomplishing nothing except confirming that radio communication represents a far greater challenge than initially hoped. The equipment functions perfectly. The problem lies in the realities of radio communication from a remote location with limited power resources. Commercial vessels might monitor emergency frequencies during certain hours, or only when approaching shipping lanes far from your position. Coast Guard stations monitor vast areas and may not maintain constant presence on all frequencies. Emergency communication requires timing, luck, and persistence that exceeds your power generation capabilities. After the failed first attempt, you spend the evening reconsidering your assessment of the radio system and the reasons your predecessors maintained it for years without achieving rescue. Perhaps they face the same frustrating reality: functional equipment that demands more resources than practical operation allows, creating hope that proves more psychologically difficult than simple acceptance of isolation. The charging system begins to feel less like ingenious engineering and more like cruel torture, hours of physical effort required to power equipment that offers tantalizing possibility but delivers only static and silence. The gap between theoretical capability and practical reality grows wider with each frustrating communication attempt that exhausts your energy while producing no meaningful progress toward rescue. Your evening journal entry reflects growing doubt about whether the radio represents genuine rescue capability or simply another form of island imprisonment disguised as hope. We will come back to this difficult question in the morning, when fresh energy might provide clearer perspective on the balance between effort invested and realistic expectations for radio communication success. Morning brings renewed determination to solve the radio communication challenge through more systematic approach, but also growing awareness of why your island predecessors never achieved rescue through the equipment they maintained so carefully. The battery bank shows full charge after extensive evening pedaling, but you now understand that each communication attempt represents a significant investment of physical energy for uncertain returns. Your second day of radio operations focuses on specific emergency frequencies during peak activity hours, but requires constant attention to power management that transforms communication attempts into exhausting ordeals. 5 minutes of transmission and scanning demands 10 minutes of pedaling to maintain battery levels, creating a cycle that leaves little energy for other essential activities like food procurement, equipment maintenance, and basic camp management. The frustration compounds as you realize that effective radio communication requires not just functional equipment, but optimal timing, atmospheric conditions, and proximity to active monitoring stations. Factors completely beyond your control and impossible to predict or influence. You can provide power and operate equipment perfectly while still failing to establish contact due to variables that no amount of effort can address. By afternoon, the physical and psychological toll of intensive radio operations becomes apparent. Your hands ache from pedaling, your voice grows hoarse from repeated emergency calls, and your optimism fades as hours of effort produce nothing but static and the occasional distant signal too weak for meaningful communication. The equipment works exactly as designed, but the fundamental challenge of remote communication remains insurmountable. The harsh realization begins to sink in. Your predecessors didn't fail to escape because they lacked communication equipment or rescue capability, but because radio communication from extreme remote locations demands resources and persistence that exceed what stranded individuals can reasonably provide. They were rescued by your boat construction efforts, not because radio communication proved impossible, but because it proved impractical relative to other escape strategies. Evening finds you slumped beside the radio equipment, emotionally drained by another day of intensive effort that accomplished nothing except confirming the gap between theoretical communication capability and practical rescue reality. The sophisticated charging system and functional radio begin to feel less like rescue tools and more like elaborate reminders of how difficult communication becomes when separated from infrastructure that makes normal radio use possible. The comfortable island living you've inherited provides excellent resources for extended residence, but the radio equipment that seemed to promise immediate rescue now appears designed more for maintaining hope than achieving practical communication results. Perhaps your predecessors understood this distinction better than you initially realized. The third day of radio communication attempts brings the crushing realization that you're repeating the same futile cycle that likely occupied your predecessors for years, investing enormous physical and emotional energy into equipment that offers theoretical communication capability but lacks the practical effectiveness needed for actual rescue coordination. The batteries charge properly, the radio functions perfectly, but contact with the outside world remains as elusive as ever. Your physical condition deteriorates from constant alternation between exhausting pedaling sessions and intensive radio operation, leaving insufficient energy for proper food, procurement, equipment maintenance, and basic health management. The fishing success and comfortable shelter become secondary concerns as radio communication consumes increasing portions of your time and energy for results that grow more disappointing with each failed attempt. More disturbing is the psychological impact of repeated failure despite functional equipment and correct procedures. Each silent response to your emergency calls reinforces the isolation that seemed temporarily resolved when you discovered the radio system. The hope that seemed so realistic 3 days ago now feels more cruel than the simple acceptance of stranded status you'd achieved before finding the communication equipment. The mathematics of the situation become undeniably discouraging, even with perfect equipment maintenance and optimal physical effort. Radio communication from your remote location demands resources that exceed sustainable levels for a single person managing all aspects of island survival. Your predecessors likely faced this same realization after their own period of intensive communication attempts that exhausted energy while producing no meaningful rescue progress. Perhaps the most difficult realization involves understanding why they maintained and improved the radio system despite its practical limitations. Not because communication remained possible, but because abandoning the equipment would mean accepting permanent isolation without retaining even theoretical rescue capability. The charging system and radio maintenance provided purposeful activity that maintained psychological connection to rescue possibility, even when practical results remained elusive. As evening approaches after another day of failed communication attempts, you face the same decision your predecessors ultimately made, whether to continue investing energy in equipment that provides hope but not practical rescue capability, or redirect efforts toward island living strategies that acknowledge communication limitations while focusing on sustainable residence until rescue opportunities arise through other means. The comfortable resources they left behind now seem less like abandoned preparation for boat theft and more like the practical choice of people who learn to balance rescue hope with reality acceptance. Your boat provided their escape because it offered practical transportation capability that radio communication, despite its sophisticated engineering, ultimately could not match. The equipment remains functional, but functionality alone cannot overcome the fundamental challenges of remote communication when infrastructure support and optimal conditions remain absent from your isolated location. The decision to step back from intensive radio operations brings unexpected relief, like setting down a heavy burden you didn't realize was causing strain until the weight disappeared. Your daily routine shifts toward the practical maintenance and sustainable living patterns that your predecessors developed over their years of comfortable island residence. The radio remains available, but no longer dominates your time and energy with its demanding operational requirements. Morning routines now begin with basic camp maintenance, checking water collection systems, tending the fire, preparing simple meals from the abundant fish supplies that require minimal time and effort to procure. The sophisticated fishing equipment makes protein procurement almost effortless compared to months of struggling with crude hooks and improvised lines at various coastal locations around the island. The tools and materials left behind require regular attention to remain functional, sharpening cutting implements, maintaining cordage and lashing materials, cleaning and organizing equipment to prevent deterioration in the tropical environment. These tasks provide purposeful activity without the emotional exhaustion of failed communication attempts, creating routines that feel sustainable rather than desperately urgent. Your afternoon hours focus on understanding and improving the systems your predecessors developed, learning their techniques for food preservation, studying their methods for equipment maintenance, exploring the sophisticated infrastructure they built throughout their settlement area. Each discovery reveals additional layers of knowledge and preparation that made their island living genuinely comfortable rather than merely survivable. The fishing platforms at the hidden inlet become daily destinations, providing both excellent food procurement and peaceful settings for reflection and planning. The abundance of fish continues to amaze you. Within an hour of casual fishing, you regularly catch more protein than you could consume in 2 days, allowing focus on quality selection and proper preservation rather than desperate quantity accumulation. Evening hours return to journaling, documenting your experiences with the radio equipment, the emotional challenges of failed rescue attempts, and the gradual acceptance of extended island residence, using resources far superior to anything you developed during your first 8 months. The writing helps process complex feelings about hope, disappointment, and adaptation to circumstances beyond your control. Tonight's entry focuses on the strange peace that comes from accepting limitation while maintaining readiness for opportunity, understanding that rescue will likely come through external factors rather than your own communication efforts, but that comfortable island living provides sustainable foundation for however long that rescue might require. We will come back to these thoughts in the morning, when routine activities might provide additional perspective on balancing acceptance with continued hope. The weeks that follow establish patterns of island living that blend the comfort and efficiency your predecessors achieved with your own preferences and habits developed over months of survival learning. The sophisticated shelter, abundant food resources, and well-maintained tools create living conditions that approach genuine comfort rather than mere survival, though always shadowed by the desire for eventual return to civilization and family. Morning routines become almost meditative, checking equipment, tending the fire, preparing breakfast from fresh-caught fish and familiar plant foods, maintaining the various systems that keep daily life running smoothly. The work feels purposeful, without being desperate, necessary, without being urgent, providing structure to days that might otherwise blur together in comfortable island monotony. Your fishing skills improve dramatically with proper equipment and productive locations, developing into genuine expertise rather than survival-level competence. The variety of fish available in the hidden inlet allows experimentation with different preparation methods, smoking and preservation techniques, and meal planning that would have seemed impossible during your early months of basic subsistence living. Equipment maintenance occupies significant time, but proves oddly satisfying, sharpening tools, repairing fishing nets, maintaining shelter materials, and caring for the various implements that make island living efficient rather than constantly challenging. The work connects you to the careful craftsmanship your predecessors developed, and you begin adding your own improvements and modifications to their designs. The radio equipment sits quietly in its corner, batteries maintained at partial charge through occasional pedaling sessions, ready for use if atmospheric conditions or timing suggest communication possibilities, but no longer the focus of intensive daily efforts that proved so psychologically exhausting. It remains available without dominating your emotional energy or physical resources. Your journal entries during this period document the gradual psychological adjustment to extended island residence, the ways comfortable living changes your relationship to time and routine, and the complex emotions surrounding indefinite separation from family and friends. The writing helps process feelings too nuanced for simple categories of hope or despair. Evening hours often find you reading the books your predecessors preserved, learning from their notes about island resource management, or simply sitting beside the fire, listening to familiar night sounds that have become comforting rather than threatening. The peaceful evenings provide space for reflection and emotional processing that were impossible during months of survival urgency. The seasonal patterns your predecessors documented in their careful notes begin revealing themselves through direct observation as your extended residence provides opportunity to notice changes in weather, fish behavior, plant growth cycles, and resource availability that require months of attention to understand fully. Island living develops its own rhythms, distinct from calendar time or external schedules. Daily maintenance tasks expand to include improvements and modifications to the inherited systems, reinforcing shelter materials before predicted weather changes, expanding food preservation capabilities, and adding personal touches that make the settlement feel more like home rather than simply functional survival infrastructure. The work provides satisfaction and purpose while improving your living situation. Your fishing expeditions to the hidden inlet become highlights of each day, combining practical food procurement with peaceful contemplation in one of the most beautiful locations you've discovered during your island residence. The sophisticated fishing platforms allow comfortable extended sessions that yield abundant protein while providing time for reflection and appreciation of natural beauty. The various tools and equipment left behind continue revealing their usefulness through daily application. specialized implements for specific tasks, efficient designs that reduce effort while improving results, and maintenance techniques that keep everything functional despite tropical weather and constant use. Learning to use these resources properly represents ongoing education in advanced survival techniques. Radio communication attempts become occasional rather than intensive, usually triggered by unusual atmospheric conditions, or simply the need to maintain hope through symbolic connection with rescue possibility. The equipment functions properly when needed, but realistic expectations have replaced the desperate optimism that proved so emotionally exhausting during your initial discovery period. Your journal entries focus increasingly on practical observations about island living, techniques that work well, seasonal changes that affect resource availability, and the psychological adaptations that make extended isolation bearable rather than devastating. The documentation serves both personal processing and potential future reference for survival knowledge. Evening routines now include careful attention to weather patterns, equipment status, and preparation for whatever challenges or opportunities tomorrow might bring, balanced with simple appreciation for the comfort and security that advanced island living provides. Tonight you'll sleep well, tended by fire and shelter, sustained by abundant food, and comforted by routine that makes island life feel manageable rather than desperate. We will come back to whatever tomorrow brings in the morning, when rest and perspective might reveal new possibilities, or simply reinforce the peaceful acceptance of comfortable island residence, until rescue opportunity appears through whatever means might eventually develop. Sleep comes easily after weeks of comfortable routine, your body settling into the sophisticated bedding system your predecessors developed with the satisfaction of physical exhaustion from productive daily activities rather than desperate survival struggles. The familiar night sounds of the island, gentle waves, rustling vegetation, distant bird calls, create a peaceful audio backdrop that has become as comforting as any childhood lullaby you remember from years before your shipwreck. But sometime after midnight, your unconscious mind begins processing information in ways that conscious thought hasn't achieved during weeks of practical island living. Dreams blend memories of radio operation, failures, with fragments of conversations about communication techniques, technical knowledge half remembered from years ago, and observations about the radio equipment that your focused operational attempts may have overlooked in favor of standard emergency procedures. The dream imagery becomes increasingly specific, hands moving over radio controls, frequencies displayed on digital readouts, voices discussing communication protocols that seem tantalizingly familiar but remain just beyond clear recollection. Your sleeping mind works through technical puzzles that conscious effort couldn't solve, assembling pieces of knowledge that waking thought processes fragmented into separate, unconnected observations about equipment and procedure. Something clicks in the dream logic that makes perfect sense while you're asleep, a realization about radio communication that feels obvious and important, though the specific details remain hazy even as the emotional certainty grows stronger. Your unconscious processing suggests possibilities that systematic conscious analysis missed during weeks of focused operational attempts that exhausted energy without achieving meaningful results. The sense of breakthrough becomes strong enough to wake you completely around 3 in the morning, your heart racing with the conviction that your dreaming mind has solved a problem your conscious efforts couldn't address. The feeling resembles the satisfaction of remembering a forgotten word that was frustratingly close to recollection, sudden clarity replacing persistent confusion about something that should have been obvious. You sit up in the comfortable bedding, fully awake despite the early hour, driven by intuitive certainty that the radio equipment holds possibilities you haven't discovered through standard operational procedures. The dream logic feels more compelling than rational skepticism, suggesting that your unconscious observation during equipment use has identified details that focused conscious attention overlooked. The urge to investigate the radio area immediately becomes irresistible, powered by the kind of middle-of-the-night inspiration that demands immediate action before morning light, and practical thinking can diminish the clarity that dreams sometimes provide when conscious analysis fails to solve persistent problems. Moving quietly through the familiar settlement in darkness, guided by memory and the faint glow of banked coals from the fire pit, you make your way toward the radio equipment with the focused purpose that comes from dream-inspired certainty about direction even when specific goals remain unclear. Your hands know the location of every tool and obstacle, months of careful living having mapped the area thoroughly in your physical memory. The radio equipment sits exactly as you left it, after yesterday's brief maintenance session. Batteries showing partial charge, controls set to standard emergency frequencies, everything properly organized according to the operational procedures you followed, consistently during weeks of communication attempts. But your dream-inspired investigation focuses not on the equipment itself, but on the surrounding area and mounting systems you've examined countless times without discovering anything unusual. Your fingers explore the radio mounting bracket, the battery connections, the antenna systems, and the wooden platform that supports the entire communications setup, searching for details that routine maintenance might have missed or dismissed as unimportant. The dream logic suggests that something about the installation holds information more significant than the operational procedures you've been following without success. Working systematically around the radio area, you begin noticing small details that previous examinations overlooked in favor of focusing on equipment function rather than installation history. Scratches in the wooden mounting platform that might be deliberate markings rather than accidental damage, wear patterns that suggest different positioning of components over time, and modifications to the original installation that served purposes beyond simple equipment, mounting. The antenna connection area reveals several small pilot holes where different antenna configurations might have been tested, and the battery mounting system shows evidence of multiple revisions that suggest ongoing experimentation with power management solutions over the years. Your predecessors maintained this communication setup. Each detail reinforces the impression that the radio installation has a more complex history than simple equipment operation. But it's the battery charging area that captures your attention most completely, where the wooden framework supporting the human-powered generation system shows wear patterns, tool marks, and modification evidence that speak to years of careful development and refinement. Your dream-inspired investigation focuses on details of the charging station that operational use never required you to examine closely. The mounting brackets, connection points, and framework joints all show evidence of ongoing adjustment and improvement, suggesting that your predecessors spent considerable time not just using the communication system, but continuously developing and refining its capabilities in ways that standard operation wouldn't reveal to casual users like yourself. Your systematic examination of the charging station framework reveals what your dream intuition was guiding you toward: small modifications and additions to the basic structure that serve purposes beyond simple equipment, mounting and power generation. Hidden behind the main battery bank, partially obscured by mounting hardware and connection cables, carved text becomes visible when examined from the specific angle your investigation has achieved. The carving appears deliberately concealed, positioned where normal equipment operation would never reveal it, but careful examination of the installation details eventually uncovers its location and significance. Your fingers trace letters and numbers etched into the wooden framework with obvious care and precision, though their meaning requires closer inspection to decipher in the limited light conditions of your midnight investigation. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing the radio equipment while gaining better access to the carved inscription, you discover text that transforms your understanding of the communication system your predecessors maintained with such obvious dedication despite its apparent operational limitations. The carving reads clearly once proper light and positioning reveal its full content. A carefully organized list of specific radio frequencies, followed by unmistakable exclamation points that suggest critical importance. The frequency list differs completely from the standard emergency channels and commercial shipping bands you've been monitoring during weeks of frustrated communication attempts. These numbers represent specific frequencies outside the normal ranges you've been scanning, suggesting specialized communication protocols or dedicated channels that require exact frequency knowledge rather than broad spectrum searching that exhausts battery power without achieving contact. Each frequency entry includes additional notations, times, dates, and brief coded references that suggest successful communication experiences rather than theoretical possibilities. The exclamation points and careful preservation of this information indicate that these frequencies provided actual contact with outside communications rather than the endless static and silence that characterized your own communication attempts using standard emergency procedures. The realization hits you with the force of genuine breakthrough. Your predecessors weren't unsuccessful with radio communication because the equipment was inadequate or their location was impossible to reach, but because effective communication required specific frequency knowledge that they discovered through methods you haven't attempted. They maintain detailed records of successful communication channels hidden where casual equipment users wouldn't discover the information. Your heart races with renewed excitement as you study the frequency list, understanding that this discovery potentially changes everything about your radio communication prospects. These aren't theoretical frequencies, but documented successful communication channels that could provide the rescue contact you've been seeking through methods that finally have proven effectiveness rather than disappointing theoretical possibility. Tomorrow will bring testing of these frequencies with the battery power and operational knowledge needed to determine whether your midnight discovery represents genuine rescue capability or another form of false hope disguised as breakthrough information. Dawn arrives with anticipation that transforms routine morning activities into hurried preparation for testing the discovered frequencies. Though experience with radio equipment has taught you the importance of proper battery management and systematic approach, rather than rushing into communication attempts that exhaust resources without achieving meaningful results. The frequency list represents genuine hope, but hope that requires careful management to avoid repeating the disappointment patterns that characterized your earlier intensive radio operations. The first attempts with the documented frequencies yield mixed results that hover frustratingly between encouraging progress and familiar disappointment. Several frequencies produce faint signals that suggest active communication channels, but the signals remain too weak for meaningful contact despite proper equipment operation and optimal timing, according to the notations accompanying each frequency entry. Your daily routine expands to include regular frequency testing sessions, carefully managed to balance battery conservation with thorough exploration of each documented channel during various time periods and atmospheric conditions. The work requires patience and systematic record-keeping, noting signal strength variations, optimal timing patterns, and atmospheric conditions that affect reception quality for each frequency. The fishing expeditions to the hidden inlet continue providing abundant protein with minimal effort, leaving adequate time and energy for radio communication work without compromising basic needs or equipment maintenance requirements. The balance feels sustainable in ways that your earlier intensive radio operations never achieved, suggesting that measured persistence might succeed where desperate urgency failed. Equipment maintenance becomes more critical now that regular radio operation demands peak performance from batteries, charging systems, and antenna connections. Small improvements to connections, careful cleaning of contacts, and attention to cable routing all contribute to marginal reception improvements that might prove significant when working with weak signals at the limits of communication range. Your evening journal entries document the complex emotions of renewed hope balanced by realistic expectations, noting signal variations and equipment performance while avoiding the emotional extremes that made earlier radio work so psychologically exhausting. The documentation serves both practical record-keeping and emotional processing of the slow progress that characterizes realistic communication development. The frequency testing reveals tantalizing hints of successful communication possibility, brief moments of stronger signals, fragments of distant voices, and equipment responses that suggest proper operation despite the ongoing challenge of establishing clear, sustained contact with outside communication networks that could coordinate rescue operations. Weeks of systematic frequency testing establish patterns that explain both the success notations in the carved frequency list and the ongoing challenges you face in recreating those communication achievements. The documented frequencies do produce stronger signals than standard emergency channels, but optimal reception requires specific timing, atmospheric conditions, and equipment settings that demand patience and persistence rather than immediate breakthrough results. Your morning routines now include checking atmospheric conditions, preparing battery systems for optimal charge levels, and reviewing previous day's reception notes to identify patterns that might improve communication timing and technique. The work feels more scientific than desperate, approaching radio communication as a technical challenge requiring systematic solution rather than hoping for immediate rescue contact. The fishing success continues providing excellent nutrition and peaceful contemplation time, but your thoughts during these sessions increasingly focus on radio communication challenges and potential solutions rather than simple appreciation of island beauty and abundant food resources. The frequency discovery has restored focus on rescue possibilities without completely overwhelming daily living activities. Afternoon radio sessions yield occasional fragments of distant conversation, voices too weak and brief for meaningful contact, but clear enough to confirm that active communication networks exist within theoretical range of your equipment and location. These glimpses of outside communication provide encouragement while reinforcing the technical challenges involved in achieving sustained contact from your remote position. The most promising signals occur during specific atmospheric conditions that seem to enhance radio propagation temporarily, but these optimal periods prove unpredictable and brief, requiring immediate response when conditions align properly. Missing optimal communication windows due to inadequate preparation or battery management represents lost opportunities that may not recur for days or weeks. Your equipment maintenance efforts focus increasingly on marginal improvements that might provide the slight performance enhancement needed to convert weak signal detection into actual communication capability. Antenna connections, cable routing, grounding systems, and battery performance all receive detailed attention aimed at maximizing equipment effectiveness within the limitations of island resources. Evening analysis of reception logs reveals patterns that suggest successful communication requires not just correct frequencies and timing, but equipment optimization beyond the basic operation you've been attempting. The carved frequency list represents only part of the communication solution. Proper equipment configuration may require additional discoveries about antenna systems, signal processing, or transmission techniques your predecessors developed through years of experimentation. The gradual realization that successful radio communication requires more than frequency knowledge and proper timing leads to expanded exploration of the communication system infrastructure, searching for additional equipment modifications or antenna improvements that might explain the gap between documented success and your ongoing reception limitations. The carved frequency list provides direction, but equipment optimization may require further discoveries about system capabilities. Daily radio sessions continue yielding occasional promising signals, but the consistency needed for reliable communication remains elusive despite systematic approach to frequency selection, timing optimization, and equipment maintenance. The fragments of distant conversation confirm that communication networks exist within range, but accessing those networks effectively requires capabilities your current system configuration doesn't provide. Your exploration of the settlement area expands beyond the immediate radio equipment location, examining antenna routing, cable connections, and mounting systems that might reveal additional components or configurations essential for optimal communication performance. The sophisticated engineering your predecessors applied to other island systems suggests their radio installation likely included enhancements beyond the obvious equipment visible in the main communication area. Morning equipment checks reveal ongoing performance variations that suggest environmental factors affecting reception quality, but systematic correlation of atmospheric conditions with signal strength patterns fails to identify controllable variables that could improve communication reliability. The technical challenge appears more complex than simple equipment operation and optimal timing. Afternoon fishing expeditions provide thinking time for considering alternative approaches to radio communication challenges, but the peaceful inlet environment increasingly feels like temporary escape from the frustrating technical puzzle rather than satisfying resolution of daily activities. Your mind returns constantly to communication problems despite the abundance and beauty of island resources. The breakthrough comes during routine area maintenance rather than focused radio investigation. While clearing vegetation growth that threatens to interfere with the settlement's various systems, you discover cable routing that leads away from the main communication area toward equipment concealed beneath brush and fallen vegetation that has accumulated over months of neglect since your predecessor's departure. Following the concealed cables reveals a sophisticated antenna system that extends the communication capabilities far beyond the basic equipment visible in the main radio area. A carefully engineered antenna array, partially collapsed and hidden beneath accumulated debris, represents the missing component that explains both the documented communication success and your ongoing reception limitations. The antenna system requires restoration to achieve the performance levels your predecessors documented in their frequency records. The antenna restoration proves far more challenging than anticipated, with cable connections that corrode apart in your hands, support structures weakened beyond simple repair, and component failures that require improvised solutions using limited island materials. 3 full days of intensive work yield only partial functionality, with signal strength improvements so marginal that they barely justify the enormous effort invested in the reconstruction project. Your first attempts with the partially restored antenna system produce results only slightly better than previous reception quality. The same weak signal fragments, the same brief glimpses of distant conversation that remain frustratingly beyond reach for meaningful communication. The technical challenges seem designed to defeat every effort at improvement, offering just enough progress to maintain hope while denying the breakthrough that would justify the work invested. After another day of equipment adjustments, connection repairs, and systematic testing of every component in the antenna array, despair begins settling over your efforts like the familiar weight of repeated failure. The sophisticated engineering your predecessors achieved over years of development proves impossible to recreate with limited tools, inadequate materials, and the growing realization that some technical knowledge died with their departure from the island. The systematic frequency scanning continues more from stubborn persistence than realistic hope, your voice hoarse from repeated emergency calls that echo into static silence hour after hour. Each documented frequency receives the same desperate message. Your location, your situation, your need for rescue, broadcast to empty air that offers nothing but the familiar whisper of atmospheric noise and distant, unreachable signals. But as afternoon light begins fading toward evening, one frequency marked with 3 exclamation points suddenly produces a signal stronger than anything you've achieved during weeks of radio operation. The clarity startles you after so much static and failure, and you begin transmitting with renewed urgency, explaining your shipwreck situation, providing coordinates, requesting any form of rescue assistance from whoever might be listening to your desperate calls. Your voice cracks with emotion as you repeat the same information over and over. 8 months stranded, urgent need for evacuation, specific location coordinates, broadcasting to what seems like empty space, but hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might hear your emergency transmission and respond with the rescue capability you've been seeking for so long without success. The static returns briefly, and your heart sinks with the familiar disappointment of failed communication attempts, until a voice cuts through the atmospheric noise with stunning clarity, a simple, questioning word that transforms everything. Hello? The sound of another human voice responding to your distress call after months of isolation hits you like physical impact, and you grip the radio microphone with trembling hands, hardly believing that actual two-way communication has finally become possible after so much struggle and disappointment. You've done what seemed impossible this morning, transformed devastating betrayal into the discovery of resources that exceed anything you achieved in 8 months of survival. The thieves didn't just steal your boat, they inadvertently led you to their sophisticated settlement, complete with comfortable shelter, abundant food supplies, advanced fishing equipment, and, most remarkably, a functional two-way radio connected to an ingenious human-powered charging system. But you've also learned the hardest lesson about hope. Having the tools for rescue and actually achieving rescue are entirely different challenges. The radio works perfectly, the antenna system is sophisticated, the power generation is adequate, yet weeks of intensive communication efforts have produced only static, fragments of distant voices, and the growing realization that your predecessors maintained this equipment for years without achieving the rescue that you accomplished in a single morning of desperate boat building. Until today. Until that frequency marked with 3 exclamation points suddenly produced a signal stronger than anything you've achieved, and your desperate transmission was answered with the most beautiful word in the English language, hello. After months of isolation, someone heard your voice and responded. Someone logged your coordinates and promised to report your position to authorities in 3 days. 3 days. Not immediate helicopter rescue, not Coast Guard vessels racing to your location, but a merchant ship that will file a report when they reach port. 3 days to process the complex emotions of renewed hope, the anxiety of uncertain rescue timing, and the strange realization that comfortable island living has prepared you to wait patiently rather than desperately. Join us next time as we discover that the most dangerous part of rescue isn't the waiting, it's learning to live suspended between hope and acceptance, between the island life you've mastered and the civilization you may or may not want to return to.